Hello, everyone. This is Shawn Harwell. You are once again listening to the Never Heard of It podcast. This is episode 52, part 2 in our series on the movies of 1985. And I'm joined today by a man from 1985. Say hello, 1985, man.
1985.
Sounds so futuristic for
Totally.
1985.
Totally. I know
what
what
is
the
your
future
name?
sounds like. My name's Craig Moorhead, and I'm the other guy who's on Never Heard of It. And thank you for listening. If you'd like to find us online, you can. You can find us at Twitter at Never Podcast. You can find us at neverheardpodcast.com. That's our site. You can find us on Facebook too. Never Heard of It podcast. And Instagram, NHOIT. That's Never Heard of Hit podcast, I believe, on Instagram. But you can find us out there. Please do, and drop us a line. We need to hear from you now more than ever. Why is that, Shawn?
Well, because A, we clearly don't know what we're doing and haven't from day one.
Mm-hmm.
But B, we always want suggestions, specifically in this series we're doing, because we want to know. What did you like from the year 1985? Is there a movie that you think didn't get the kudos it deserved, or maybe got more kudos than it deserved?
Nothing's worse than too many kudos.
That's right. And obviously, if you don't know what we're talking about at all, go back and listen to episode 51. That'll fill you in. If you think you know absolutely everything about 1985 already, hey, you're here. We're going to talk about 3 movies today specifically and get into some of the big themes of the year in movies. And Craig, watching and rewatching 2 of the 3 movies that we're talking about today really hammered home the idea of the overall motif of 1985 in movies, and something we talked about specifically in the last episode, and that is just how predominant youth culture is this year in movies. And specifically today we're going to talk about kids.
Right.
Movies about actual kids who are not yet teenagers for the most part, and find themselves in a bit of peril in each instance. The 3 movies we're going to talk about are, we're starting at the top, obviously, because Goonies, everybody knows Goonies, huge monster hit of the year. I think, what did we say? It finished 6th overall in the box office this year, if I'm not.
That's right.
Nope, I'm wrong. 9th.
Oh.
Close enough.
Nice. All right.
$61 million. Nothing to slouch at, obviously. And huge hit all across the board. If you're a male between the ages of, I'd say, 35 and 45, I can't imagine this movie didn't play a large part in your youth. We're also going to talk about Explorers. I think a movie that feels like, at least to me and others, is one that's very much a companion to the likes of Goonies, to the likes of E.T. even. Mm-hmm. And then lastly, we're going to talk about D.A.R.Y.L, or if you want to be an asshole about it, D.A.R.Y.L. Mm-hmm. Because, as the movie likes to point out, that is an acronym. Boy, does it point that out quite a bit. But a movie that, I specifically remembered watching as a kid and thinking fondly about, and then watching it again as an adult. A slightly different situation. We'll get to all of that. I do think right up front, maybe that's a good segue to just mention the idea of nostalgia. Yep. And, looking at all these things now, both of us being over 40, having kids of our own, Craig, we know nostalgia does funny things to us. Obviously, it feels like we're in a very nostalgia-obsessed moment in time. However, I think you could argue, watching these movies, these 3 specifically, maybe the 80s were nostalgic themselves, because I think you have directors here kind of playing off of the stuff that they watched as kids, and like the adventure movies that they grew up with, and finding sort of new ways to fashion those, perhaps, for a modern audience at that time. This is 1985, right? We're doing it.
1985.
Craig, let's talk about Goonies then, because that was, as we mentioned in the last episode, a lot of the impetus for doing this series. You watched it again recently. I've seen it in the past 2 years. I didn't rewatch it this time because I wanted to get to the other two movies because I wasn't as, completely familiar with those two. What did you think watching it again as an adult with kids? And did you watch it with your kids?
I did watch it with my kids. So my daughter is 4. My son is 8. No, I'm sorry. Oh, man.
She just had a birthday, right?
Yes. My daughter just had a birthday, so she is 5, and my son is 8.
Happy birthday, Grace.
But when they watched it, they were 4 and 8. And that makes really all the difference.
Yeah, and most importantly, what did they think of Goonies?
Well, here's the deal. After Sloth kissed Chunk on the cheek when they were down in the dungeon down there, they both said, "That's enough for me. I don't need to watch anymore." And so we turned it off, and then we talked about it for a while, and we said, "Are you scared of Sloth?" And they said, "Yeah, he's kind of weird." And we said, "Well, yeah, I mean, this became like a real family meeting.
Sloth is a tough one.
We're just like, look, if you watch the whole thing, you won't feel scared of him anymore. Like, that's as much as we can tell you."
Oh, you don't want to spoil it.
Exactly. I mean,
I like that. You're sticking to your principles there. Yeah.
Trying. And so they finally said, all right. And yeah, by the end, they thought he was awesome. And they loved it. Like, they loved the movie. But in that early going, they were very tense, as, I mean, the movie obviously wants them to be.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, that was their reaction. They loved it, but it was tough going at the beginning.
Well, beyond that, I do want to know, because, I think this is something that I picked up on watching Explorers and D.A.R.Y.L. And we talked about this last week. The PG-13 and that fine line, with the kids there and thinking about Goonies, were there things beyond Sloth that you were worried might be objectionable? I mean, obviously you have the Fratelli brothers firing guns.
Yeah.
I think that's the opening sequence, right? Is their sort of escape?
Yeah. Well, the very first thing you see is I think his name is Robert Davi. It pretty much opens with Robert Davi hung from a jail cell door. Essentially, as far as an 8 or 4-year-old is concerned, that's a dead guy hanging. Like that's how the movie opens. Yeah. And then of course he wakes up and he punches, and there's a lot of explaining to do if you have kids who are 8 and 4. And then then there's a chase. But definitely, I mean, there are like realistic dead bodies to deal with.
Yeah.
There is, I mean, they threatened to put Chunk's hand in a blender. Like, there's some pretty intense stuff. The language is pretty hardcore. And it's kind of weird because the crooks are super cartoonish. Like, they could not be more cartoonish, but at the same time, they're also clearly dangerous. Like, it's not like Home Alone crooks.
No.
Home Alone crooks, they're not going to threaten to really do anything that bad to you.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, the Goonies crooks, like, are absolutely out for blood. I mean, they're moving bodies around. Like, it's all that stuff.
Specifically being anchored by their mother, which, is like, in some ways, that's way more, you would imagine, horrifying to a kid, because obviously they have moms. And, to think that they would be like, your mom's the ringleader of the crime family? Sure. That's pretty frightening stuff. And
Anne Ramsey is perfectly cast.
Of course. Yeah, the best. Now, did any of that stuff seem to stick with them, or did you have to have any conversations about that kind of thing, or no, it was just Sloth?
No, yes. I mean, Sloth was the scariest, I think, mainly because they respond very strongly to anything that is unknown, and like, you clearly are not seeing this guy's face for so long, and it just feels unsettling. And then you see his face, and that freaked him out, and and of course by the end he's totally a hero, and they're not worried about those crooks anymore. But the crooks do pose a real danger, and so there was real tension for the kids throughout this chase. Like, it wasn't just like, what funny thing is going to happen with the crooks this time. It was like, they could do something bad.
Yeah, and I think that's like, it feels like the real hallmark of the great Spielberg Amblin thing is that continual raising of stakes and just that excitement, and you're in it from moment to moment, and never kind of lets you take a real breath as far as that excitement level is concerned, unless maybe you're in your 40s. I don't know. So what did you think? We'll transition from Never Kids Heard of It podcast to what did Craig the adult man think of Goonies watching it again? How long had it been since you'd seen it?
It really hadn't been that long. Like I think I watched it within the last couple of years, or I watched parts of it in the last couple of years. But yeah, Craig the Virile Man, it's not a good movie.
Okay. Are we gonna have to fight?
It's got a lot of great moments in it. And I mean, and we can get into this later, but it's got Jeff Cohen as Chunk, who is an absolute gold mine. If I was a director and I cast that kid and then I was watching him do that stuff on set, I would just be like, I don't know, I hit the jackpot with at least one kid. Maybe not everybody else, but that kid is incredible. I can't believe there wasn't a movie built around that guy, quite frankly. Anyway, but the movie, I mean, the movie just doesn't even try to make sense most of the time. And it's I guess maybe that's how much of a kid's movie it is. Like, they put this story together, and everyone probably just felt like, it doesn't matter if, any of these decisions make sense, or if, any of this stuff really makes any sense. Like, let's just get them in there, get them underground so we can get the Indiana Jones stuff going.
Yep, have the
and then
adventure.
No one will care. And that's exactly how I felt when I was a kid. Like, I was like, yeah, okay, they found a map, and then they're going to go, and then it's fine. And there are a bunch of booby traps for no reason whatsoever. But okay, let's do this. Like, I was as a kid, I didn't care about any of that. Like, I was just amazed by everything. And so, but that's the thing. I mean, as a full ass grown man, the script itself is not very good. A lot of the dialogue is pretty terrible. A good number of the jokes fall super flat, and stuff just randomly happens. It could have been tighter. Like if we didn't have things like Back to the Future and like E.T., you might say, oh, that's as good as they could do. But it's not. Like, they could have done better. But it's still, it's still really fun to watch.
I'm gonna just give a brief counterpoint and just say you're wrong.
Okay, that's fine.
So moving on. No, I really enjoyed it the last time I watched it. It's tough to kind of quantify good movie, great movie for me with this one specifically, because it is such, as I talked about, like the movie that I acted out. Like, that's what I played for like a solid probably 2 years with my friend in my neighborhood, riding bikes and going on. I wanted to have the Goonies adventure. And watching it again, maybe it's just, and maybe that's a testament to it, that it does work for some people on that level, that it is able to kind of, make me tap back into that experience a little bit. But I just remember loving all the performances again. Josh Brolin's fun. I mean, Feldman, all of that stuff. Like, to me, Data, those are the movie. It's those kids, and they're such likable, definable kids that, I don't know, I forgive jokes that fall flat or lacks of motivation. And, maybe I shouldn't. I think that's kind of what you're saying, is that, if you're taking it at face value about the story of it, maybe it falls a little flat. But I'm here to say that there are times where that's okay. If you've got that something else that's kind of like magical, and I think a lot of that comes just from that cast, then, boy, I think you can just forgive so much. I can. I'm saying I can. I forgive you, Goonies.
Well, I'll say this. I mean, I think, like, I don't want to get to Explorers too soon, but I feel like that's a major difference between this and Explorers.
Totally.
Because you have very likable casts and all that, and neither story is necessarily like stronger, just in terms of like the story holding up stronger than the other, but there is just more magic to Goonies.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, anyway.
And definitely Daryl, yeah.
And I was definitely predisposed to the Indiana Jones thing. Like, I think that was the genius of that premise, because ever since I saw Raiders of the Lost Ark, I was pretending I was Indiana Jones. And now here's a movie of people my age who are basically Indiana Jones.
Right.
I mean, that's all I want. That's what every poster told me it was going to be, and that was fantastic. So, yeah.
And I think, that's a thread through the three of these movies, and looking kind of back at that period as like being the great period for kids movies, and like sort of cross that gap between having something for adults and the kids as well. It just feels like these kids are more of a reflection of actual kids than what I see mostly in movies with young actors today, versus like this and Explorers and even D.A.R.Y.L, the main kid excluded. They just feel like kids down the street in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And I think that's the real success of Goonies and Explorers, is that these are really ordinary kids in extraordinary situations. D.A.R.Y.L flips that by having an extraordinary kid who's a robot, and we're going to get to that, in a very ordinary situation for the bulk of the movie, which is interesting and maybe why it's less successful. Looking at Explorers and thinking about, there's a very small scene where you see River Phoenix's home life, and there's kids all over the damn place, and they're eating and making a mess. And I immediately thought of like Close Encounters, like Dreyfuss's family, and like seeing that, and E.T. when Drew Barrymore and Elliot and Michael are running around their house and that kind of thing. I don't know. Like, that's, to me, is the real magic of these movies, is making that feel like a real home life.
Yeah.
I do have a question for you watching Goonies again.
Mm-hmm.
They don't ever explain where the hell the name Goonies comes from, right?
They do, kind of.
I mean, they call it Goondocks, right?
Right. That's what I always got from it. I remember as a kid watching it, and at the end just not understanding why the movie was called Goonies at all.
I know, right? Yeah.
Because what's a Goondock? But yeah, I just assumed they called that area the Goondocks, and so they're Goonies. But yeah, they never get into that though.
And
they don't go deep into that idea.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about it. Like, this is a top 10 movie of the year. That's the title, and it's never really explained.
No.
It's fantastic.
It is fantastic.
What's a big flaw of Goonies in your mind?
I think the biggest flaw... Sorry, that was going to sound super cheesy, so I'm going to make it even cheesier.
Please do.
I think the biggest flaw, Shawn, are the small moments. Because a lot of the plot is fine. I think that my biggest problem with any of the big plot points are... And I realize that this is just a matter of suspension of disbelief, but for some reason my suspension of disbelief just sort of runs out at this point. Why and what is the point of all the booby traps? Why were they built?
Can I tell you my understanding?
Yeah.
It was that, obviously, when Willie wanted to keep other people from his gold...
Mm-hmm.
He intended to get out of there with that ship, but until then, they were the booby traps. And that to me is still a little foggy as to why. And because I thought you were going to say, there's a pristinely preserved pirate ship,
right,
just hanging out in this cave, and they have little trouble, as I recall, getting it out of there.
Sure.
Why didn't someone before them do that? Again, I forgive all these things because my glasses are so rose-colored. It's ridiculous on this one.
Well, I think you have to, and certainly my kids didn't care at all.
Mm-hmm.
But it just got to me where I was trying to figure out, like, so is One-Eyed Willie like coming and going then?
Yeah.
Because there's a solution to every booby trap. So
right.
It's not, I don't know.
Can you imagine how, God, that must have been so annoying. It's like he's hanging on his pirate ship. It's like, shit, I ran out of milk. I got to go into town.
Yeah.
And then,
which that was a common problem.
Traps. Yeah.
Yeah.
Running out of
Not
milk.
having milk.
Big time. Big time. I don't know
Pirates
how many
milk,
cows
man.
are on the Goondocks. No, and it is like, they're pretty elaborate booby traps. I mean.
They're super elaborate. And that's, I mean, but that's exactly what the audience wanted. That's exactly what I wanted.
Yeah.
I don't want anything less than a piano made out of bones.
Yeah. They look cool.
Yeah.
It feels part of that world.
It's scary and it's weird.
Yeah.
But to get back to the smaller points thing,
mm-hmm.
I have two examples that kind of happen kind of quickly together.
Okay.
That just bug me enough that I'm taking out of the movie. One is they go to that restaurant, right? They've seen them carry these garbage bags out. They go to the restaurant. They're trying to figure out how to get inside. And Chunk sees bullet holes in the car and comes running around to the front to tell the guys, there's bullet holes. We got to get out of here. Like, he's freaked out. Mm-hmm. And then Mouth says,
"Hey, wait a minute, Chunk. You know, I got some naked pictures of your mom taking a bath. Want to buy them?" "What?" "Real cheap."
Suddenly, Chunk flips on a dime. He's so mad, he charges Mouth, who steps out of the way, and Chunk goes through the door. And I was just like, that's a super awkward moment. Like, only thing Chunk wants to do is leave because they're going to get shot and killed.
Yeah, but
then Mouth
Craig,
says something dumb about his pictures, and Chunk's like, oh, yeah.
Do you not remember when they talked about the fact that Chunk's mom died 3 years before the movie took place?
I still don't buy it, bro. I'm sorry.
No, I mean, yeah, it's a little. So I think, in the grand scheme of priorities,
right,
bullet holes trumps what's obviously a lie about his mom being naked.
Right.
His mom is probably a perfectly lovely woman. In fact, I think we see her at the end, right? There's nothing for him to feel too ashamed about or even believe Mouth, obviously.
And here's the thing. In the trailer, if you check out the trailer, they cut that exact same moment, but they cut out the thing where Mouth says anything about the pictures. So it's like Chunk freaks out. He's running for the front door. Next thing you see is from the inside, Chunk going through the door.
Oh, okay.
And it's like, yeah. So like I would have been like, that's fine. Yeah. He tripped, he fell, he went in the door. Great.
He's a clumsy guy. They've established that. Yeah. Interesting.
And so shortly after that, though, so they run into Ann Ramsey going into the restaurant. Mm-hmm. Okay, so 4 kids have shown up at a place where they have murdered people and they have moved bodies around. She says, "Do you guys want some water?" And then gives them this nasty water that no one wants to drink. And then Sean Astin says he has to use the bathroom. So she sends him downstairs. And he looks around and finds Sloth. And then runs out of there. And Brand is there suddenly. And Brand takes them all out. And Ann Ramsey's there the whole time. I guess my thing is, these guys are murdering people. Why didn't they just murder everybody? Like, why was she even... her face? Everyone can see exactly who she is. They know exactly where she is. Would she have just let people waltz in and out of this restaurant? So that's just another thing where I was like, I don't understand why this is happening. Like, why did they even have the kids run into her?
Yes, the classic movie villain conundrum, where they don't kill the protagonist when they have the opportunity. And in the movie, in the first 10 minutes.
Right. And I just feel like she has all the motivation in the world to do that.
True.
Like, it's not like she has to play it off so that everything goes smoothly. She doesn't have to play anything off. No one knows they're out there. So anyway, those are the examples of the kind of things that kind of start to pile up. Right. But between those things, you got Chunk. Jesus, you got Chunk, and he's so great. Anyway.
Now, what did you feel about watching? Let's talk about how this movie is it is a 1980s movie, specifically 85.
Yeah.
What feels dated to you watching this? And I'm specifically curious about Data and even some of the fat stuff with Chunk. These feel like sensitive things that probably would not fly, sadly, in a 2017 movie, maybe for better or worse. That's up for debate. What is about this movie that you think maybe doesn't hold up or just doesn't reflect the kind of current mindset, even if it just applies to movies?
Well, honestly, I mean, the biggest thing is that these kids don't have an internet or apps or anything.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. Yeah.
And so, I don't know, this I don't want to simplify it too much, but it's like, yeah, when we were kids, the fun thing was to get on your bikes and go somewhere.
Right.
And go exploring. But I feel like now they would have been on the internet for the first 20 minutes. And then it's been like, oh, wait, those are the Fratellis. Let's not do that.
Yeah.
So in a weird way, it kind of feels like this adventure would not have gone off at all.
Right.
What about you?
Well, I was going to say, bikes, I think, figured prominently in all 3 of the movies. And I definitely felt that watching Explorers and D.A.R.Y.L is kids just get on their bikes and go. That is, it feels like less of a reality in today's world, sadly. I think some of the language, for sure. Some of just seeing kids left alone, and their parents aren't watching over them all the time, and they're farting around in the attic and going through crap and yelling at each other. I think all that stuff is interesting. I don't know, I love Data so much, and I love the performance so much. It's hard for me to look at that and go, geez, yeah, that's a bit of a stereotype. I mean, it clearly is, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing I was struggling with too.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, he wasn't putting on a voice.
No. He's a strong character. He's active. He's
honestly the character that I pretended to be the most.
Sure, yeah.
As a kid. Because it was cool. He had all that stuff. Like, he had all those
traps,
cool inventions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Slick shoes.
So, he had a boxing glove that just shoots out of his coat. And that, by the way, doesn't bother me at all. No. Like, I was like, that's great. Of course he had a boxing glove under there the whole time. No, I thought he was the coolest one. But, I guess that's a good question.
Yeah. That, I think, is probably not happening in 2017. Definitely Fratelli's would look a lot different.
Sure.
That whole plot would be neutered, I suspect, or given some sort of supernatural element.
Possibly.
And then Sloth. I think maybe that's the biggest one that we're overlooking. Is like, what the hell is Sloth if not an extremely disabled person? And I love that he's a hero in this thing.
Oh, yeah.
But there's certainly no way you're working anything like that into a movie today. There's just not. And I think, part of me wonders if that's somewhat of the holdup of why there's never been a sequel to this damn thing. Is because people are going to want to see Sloth.
There's no way you're going to do it without Sloth.
No, what do you do without Sloth? So it's interesting. I don't know. Maybe that movie will happen eventually. Maybe they'll go the TV route. I hadn't thought about the internet thing, but it is a great point. And actually, we can wrap up Goonies a little bit because computers actually figure prominently in both Explorers and D.A.R.Y.L. So they are definitely working their way into movie stories in a big, big way by this time.
Yeah.
But just not in Goonies. And I think it's certainly better off for it, probably.
That is probably true.
Any last thoughts on Goonies? Anything you stumbled across? We talked about. I didn't get a chance to check out the commentary. I think it'd be kind of interesting. There's certainly, obviously, like Google, there's a million things written about this movie, and there's been cast reunions, and obviously, a lot of these players have gone on to all sorts of highs and, if not lows, like sideways diagonal moves. Mm-hmm. Some of them have bands now, apparently.
Sure.
If you want to call it that. No offense, Corey Feldman.
Like one of the things I kept thinking about while watching this, just to kind of hit the tip of the iceberg, is Sloth, again, who is the third Fratelli brother. And how did all that work?
Yeah.
Have they just always kept him chained up and he has such a good attitude still?
Well, he loves Baby Ruth, so...
He does love Baby Ruth.
Give the guy some candy. He's all right for a couple of hours.
Oh, my God. But
yeah, it's an interesting thing. Maybe that's what the sequel should be from his POV, because wouldn't you love to know? Yeah, it's like, what did he witness? Some of what the crimes that these people were committing that he was related to. He clearly has a moral compass that is truer, pointing north, than his relatives. But it doesn't seem like he had a very good life with them, sadly.
Although I will throw this out there, just to end the Goonies talk on a bad note. Why hasn't Sloth done anything until now? He's clearly stronger than everybody. He doesn't like anyone in his family.
Yeah.
Why is he only now fighting back against them? Come on, Sloth.
Well, if they have guns, I don't know.
They're not very smart.
Chained up.
We pulled the chains out of the wall.
That's true. He did pull the chains out.
Maybe he just needed Chunk. Maybe Chunk was like the catalyst.
And the restaurant was just a rendezvous, right? That was just a temporary hiding place for them. I don't know. Yeah. Well, we didn't do this. We should do this. Still, what's a good favorite moment from Goonies for you?
Oh, man.
You want me to go first?
Yeah, you should go first.
Absolutely love, and yes, it's coincidental. Total movie moment. When Chunks runs out of the house to go get help and flags down a car. It's that whole thing, Mama Me, like when he starts singing and throw him in the trunk. I like that sequence. Classic.
Yeah, he starts reciting, and I don't know what it is. He starts reciting something in Hebrew.
Really? Yeah.
Like he just switches straight from Mister, you gotta help us because you gotta help us, and then just like, oh man, you know what? I'm gonna go with a Chunk moment too, because Chunk has the best small moments in this movie.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with 2 because this is one of the smallest things in the world. But if you watch the movie, I think it's Anne Ramsey or it's one of the brothers. At some point, right after the kids have come in the restaurant, they're all kind of lined up there. Chunk is the closest to the camera. And whoever it is, whoever the bad guy is, grabs Chunk's cheeks and is squeezing his cheeks. And like you just his eyes like looking down at the fingers. Like it's so good. But the other one is when he's in the basement, they have him talking about stuff and they're giving him ice cream. And he says he can't give them some piece of information. They take the ice cream away from him, which he tries to hold on to.
Right.
And then he very slowly goes for the spoon, and they grab that away from him too.
Yeah.
Oh man,
That's how hungry he was for that ice cream.
He's got that guy. Every one of his moments for me totally lands.
Yeah.
And I think that's insane. Like I would watch it just for him, even if I didn't like anything else in it.
Well, maybe now that I'm thinking about it here, I know we're just going to talk Goonies forever. What do you think about Sean Astin in this movie? I mean, does he get enough? Because I think about it, and clearly he's the straight guy. He's probably the one that would be most like any kid watching this movie, or at least most kids. And he carries the sort of the weight of the motivation. He's the one that plants the seed and is determined to see it through. Yeah. That's a tough kind of thing to carry for a child actor, I think. And what were your thoughts watching it again, just as far as his performance is concerned? And obviously, I mean, Chunk stood out. So again, I think he's destined to be overshadowed in some ways by his co-stars here. But I don't know, maybe should we give more love to Sean Astin in Goonies?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think he's not at his best acting yet as a 12-year-old.
Yeah, it's
but
tough.
But I think he is perfectly cast, and he's so sincere, and I feel like honestly and I think it's a terrible speech when they're in the bottom of the well and he's saying it's their time up there, but it's our time down here. Mm-hmm. Just the way that speech is written, I think is just awful, and it makes me cringe. No. But he sells it. It's like that, and when he's going through the story that his dad told him, I think are two things that in a different actor's hands would have been terrible. But he seems so genuinely excited about it to me that I love that. Whereas, and I would say this conversely, when I was a kid, aside from Data, I think that I thought Mouth was super funny. Yeah. And now I almost don't find him funny at all.
Interesting.
He's the sarcastic one.
Yeah.
It's just like, I don't need that. But I think there's a good balance in general in this ensemble. Like I feel like there's not really anyone who's totally wasted. What about you?
Thinking about it, I definitely feel like that's a pretty impressive feat Sean Astin pulled off. And I would probably venture to say the same in regards to Feldman, where he feels like, especially being a parent now, it's like, oh man, that kid would be annoying to hang around. But, he's the one that's maybe got the inner demons a little bit,
Sure.
that come out a little bit.
Yeah.
And that's something, there's a shade of that in Explorers a little bit. And, I think that is something that these movies kind of handle delicately, even E.T. as well, thinking about that and sort of the home life. As a character that something's not quite perfect, whether it's, like in E.T., it's a single mom, or what's going on here, where the parents are possibly going to be forced to move because they don't have enough money. I don't know. I mean, to me, that in this instance certainly filters down on Sean Astin's shoulders. And, without it, I don't know what this movie looks like. It would be interesting to think if you swapped Ethan Hawke or River Phoenix or... Yeah. The kid Barrett Oliver from D.A.R.Y.L, one of these other kids that obviously, like, there's a shit ton of kids floating around in movies around this era. Anthony Michael Hall,
Sure.
What would Goonies look like with somebody else in that role? And it's obviously like that's a complete hypothetical, but I don't know. Sean Astin, I think, maybe deserves a higher bit of praise here.
Yeah.
What about? And I'm thinking about it now. The ladies in this movie in Goonies. Anything there, watching it again, I feel like they're not just background or just going along for the ride, or maybe I want to think that in regards to Goonies, but I don't know. With these other two movies, there's definitely, there's really nothing for the young girls here.
Well, and that was something I was thinking about before. I mean, that's I mean, look at the entire year, really. Like, how lucky are we that we're just white dudes growing up? Because, I mean, that's what every movie's about. And, of course, it's not something I thought about then. But it was like going to see this movie. It's like, this is some of my reality reflected back at me.
Mm-hmm.
You know? Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, I think they're both integral to the movie now. You know, like, I wouldn't want them to be gone.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, do they generally just serve to be saved? I guess not, because if only because Andy knows how to play a piano.
Yeah.
And so they get through that. But I mean, yeah, but beyond that, they're also just good additions to the team. Like, they're not forgotten about. They certainly have characters, which is nice. Like, they don't just sort of disappear into the background until somebody needs to be randomly kissed in a cave,
right,
while everyone's peeing. Yeah.
And I do think it is kind of an interesting dynamic that they created by, you know, it's not just that Andy has to be saved by Bran. It's that, you know, she has that moment with Mikey, the little brother, you know, and even with Plimpton and Feldman there, it's like, it's not really like a romantic thing, but it's just like that early romance thing, which I think is such a middle school thing too, you know, for boys, obviously. And I think I kind of appreciate what they did there with that, as opposed to just making it, Andy got herself kidnapped by the Fratellis, and now Bran's got to go save him or something. You know, there's not just a total damsel in distress thing here, which is nice and hard to do. Sadly.
Absolutely.
Oh, man. You know what else is hard to do?
What's that?
Aliens.
Apparently.
Aliens are hard to do. Explorers, 1985 movie, obviously. Joe Dante directed, fresh off of huge success with Gremlins. Extremely notable now as the very first movie, and in fact, if you believe the IMDb trivia and what's floating around on the internet, the literal first bit of acting that Ethan Hawke ever did. Showed up at an audition with a friend, got the job himself. And River Phoenix, late River Phoenix, great, obviously, playing completely against everything else he would do after this, being Geek 101. I mean, he's like Urkel level to a degree. But this is a movie about three kids who, two of them are definitely sort of sci-fi nerds and then a computer nerd. And they sort of, through dreams, Craig, which that's still a bit of an interesting element in this movie, piece together blueprints for some sort of computing advancement that allows them to create an orb that they can control and increase the size of, which allows them to then create a ship to fly inside of this orb, which does ultimately take them to space. I think there's 2/3 of an interesting movie here, and then that last bit where they do kind of come face to face with Alien really is where my nostalgia reached its limits with this movie. Right. Because I was thinking about it today, and the design of the aliens is extremely, I think, kid-friendly, but just it looks cartoonish. It suits. But the delivery is annoying. They basically are aliens that have existed on just an overload of American TV. If you're of a certain age and you remember seeing Robin Williams on like a late night show as an interview where he just starts talking and doesn't stop and does like 8,000 voices, that's what watching the last act of Explorers is like. It was exhausting, and it totally took me out of this movie, sadly. But again, I think this is a notable movie. It feels like it's definitely trying to pull off the Spielberg thing. You look at that poster, it's got vibes of, you know, the flashlights in E.T., and there's something in the shed, although it's behind a picket fence here. It's got the Joe Dante thing. Apparently was rushed into production, and some of that comes through. once again, you got ordinary kids in an extraordinary circumstance. And so this was a big year for that. And we talked last time about how this movie, in my mind, was a much bigger deal than it turned out to be at the box office, where I think it placed, I had it here, in the 80s, 86. Actually made less money than Brazil, Craig. And Once Bitten.
It's not easy to do.
No, barely made more money than the Ghostbusters reissue. Anyway, I definitely watched this movie a lot as a kid. What about you? Is this something that stuck out to you from childhood? And then what did you think watching it again?
Well, in a weird way, it is. I think that I've seen it before I watched it this time, although I'm not entirely sure that I saw the entire thing before. Mm-hmm. I definitely remember the posters.
Yeah.
I know that vehicle very well. I've seen tons of pictures of that.
Right.
It's definitely something that fired up my imagination as a kid, just seeing that stuff. But yeah, I mean, I don't think I'd ever watched the entire thing. And it's exactly that. I mean, it's trading on every last bit of Steven Spielberg goodness that's out there. And for
I wouldn't say
of that
last
movie,
bit.
Well, yeah.
There's more to come, I'm sure. Yeah.
But I mean, again, like with stuff like Back to the Future that opened the same summer that we're going to talk about, it's just like, I don't know, it's such a great start for a movie.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's the guy who directed Gremlins. Like, how could you go wrong? Do you feel like he went wrong? What do you think he was going for with the ending?
I'm not sure. And from what I've read, I certainly don't think Joe Dante was satisfied with the ending. It sounds like it wasn't completely even written as they were shooting. It was rushed into production from the beginning. I believe the movie was offered to Wolfgang Petersen originally off the heels of Neverending Story. And I think he wanted to shoot somewhere not in America. And they were like, no, it's got to be American. These have to be American kids. And so they went after Joe Dante, and I think that's where he excels, like by far, is that opening act of this movie, and like again tapping into what these American kids look like, and probably the kind of stuff that he liked as kids. I mean, there's a lot of little science fiction stuff in this movie. You know, I mean, Ethan Hawke's character is somewhat obsessed with old sci-fi movies, and there's War of the Worlds playing on TV, and you know, there's magazines and books and all of that stuff, and I'm sure that's probably personal to Joe Dante. I think the dream stuff is a mystery. Mm-hmm. It appears as if they go up on this spaceship and basically sit and listen to these aliens for 10 minutes, and then the alien's dad comes out, like, you know, doesn't speak English, and he's like, well, Dad's upset, you guys have to go home now. And that's it. I don't know what you take away from that. I mean, I really don't. It's other than just establishing contact, and then there's 1,000 questions that raises if that is the goal. You know, it's why these kids? Why do they dream these things? You know, what were they planning the dreams? I think some of that might be explained or attempted to be explained. It totally gets lost in there. But mostly the movie I think it just becomes stagnant. Like it just loses a lot of momentum and movement when they go on this spaceship. You're in this really unfamiliar setting, and it just slows down oddly. Whereas you would think that's where you ramp up. Like you're in space, you got to meet aliens. And some of that is I think it's because of we can't imagine what that looks like. We don't know. And so it's just uncomfortable, and it takes you a while to kind of get used to the design of these creatures and things like that. Whereas the rest of the movie is clearly set in reality. And, you know, I think it does a good job of, there's bullies. There's, you know, a girl that Ethan Hawke is into, which is, I think, Amanda Peterson, who was a love interest in Can't Buy Me Love. Mm-hmm. You know, there's just some of that stuff that is really universal. And boy, you just lose that when you go on a spaceship, you know? Yeah.
I mean, to take it at face value, it's about sort of dashing the hopes and dreams of someone. Oof. Or it's just sort of that story of don't get your hopes up. Like, I don't know, but there's a part of me that kind of admires that ending. Mm-hmm. Where it's like, here's what we're going to do. We're going to build this up. We're going to have this great story of these kids. We're going to go into space. And this one kid just can't wait to explore all that. And then when he gets there, it's going to be the most annoying place he's ever been in his life.
There's a saxophone, an alien playing a saxophone.
Yeah.
Imagine if that's.
Just,
I would love that to be actually our first contact with aliens would involve one of them playing a saxophone.
I don't know why why that had to be a part of his journey. Like why Ethan Hawke needed to be disappointed in what was going on. Because it's just bizarre. It's certainly kind of interesting, but the jokes are not funny. And then that's over. And then they have this goodbye scene that almost feels like
oh my gosh,
these kids save the world or something.
When they're all flying through the clouds, holding hands, like that's a dream, right?
That's the aliens contacting them again.
Yeah,
I thought.
I mean, but it's such a weird thing to end on. I think, you know.
Oh, it's super weird. It's like there's nothing more awkward than these kids pretending to fly. Like that definitely didn't work. Yeah, and it's just too bad. Like there's so much interesting stuff before that. I don't know. You almost want it to just turn out that they don't ever go into space. They just end up like fighting the military or something. You know, the other trope of the 80s.
Yeah.
And speaking of tropes, that was another like this to me says 80s movie almost more than anything, which is I think like you're meeting maybe the main character who's a kid, and you start off on a television with some kind of sci-fi or horror thing happening. Mm-hmm. Like I feel like I could name 10 movies off the top of my head right now that just do that exact same thing, and I feel like I don't even see that very much anymore.
Yeah. Well, we'll see it again in Back to the Future for sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely Back to the Future.
Well, while we're on that note, we'll hit some other tropes as well. Just watching this. The walkie-talkies. I think, were there walkie-talkies in Goonies? Didn't Mouth have one at the beginning?
There was a walkie-talkie at the beginning.
I mean, for sure. You got bikes in this movie. One of the kids, Darren, played by Jason Presson, rides a dirt bike to middle school, it appears, of some kind, to and from. I think there's an Apple IIe computer in there. You know, like, again, computers are kind of working their way in thing. They named their spaceship after a Bruce Springsteen song. So we talked about Springsteen and Reagan in the previous episode. Here we go.
Yeah.
They say ass, kick ass a couple times, like 3 or 4 times. And what looks like, at least, you know, obviously it's fake blood, but it looks like real blood. It's red.
Sure.
When River Phoenix gets punched in the nose, you're probably not seeing that in a kid's movie these days.
You have Peeping Tomism treated as, isn't that sweet?
Yes, totally.
Which is definitely an 80s thing.
Yep. You've got a kid showing up with a beer that he took from Dead and taking sips from it. And that again.
And it's not even,
it's not even like played as a joke,
It's almost
really.
Not even a thing.
No, it's not.
It's just like, oh yeah.
Well, let's talk about that then, because actually I really, in some ways, was surprised by how much I liked the depiction of these 3 main kids. Ethan Hawke, who's just so enthusiastic, and I loved that. Like, it's like he's the guy that's, we're going to space. Like, think about it. It's pretty interesting. Like, his delivery is so good. Like, there's even like, it felt like they hold some of those scenes just long enough where it's like, okay, I get it. Like, he's just that kid. And it's like, what are you going to say to that kid? It's like, yeah, okay. Like, he's a bit of a nerd, you know? Yeah. And then you've got River Phoenix, who's totally a nerd. But, smart. He's the guy doing science experiments in his basement and all that stuff, I think, is fun. And then, this other kid, Darren, played by Jason Presson, he's the kid that's got the troubled home life, a bit like, we see that a little bit through across these kind of movies. But I like how they handled that even. You never see the dad, as far as I remember. He just sort of talks about him. He doesn't even, he's alcoholic, obviously. Mm-hmm. He also is like, my dad's okay. He just blah, blah, blah. He doesn't really completely disparage his father, which is the kind of thing I think you get then, and we'll see this, I think, when we start looking at things like Breakfast Club and some of the teenage movies, is that angst comes out. Whereas that's like sort of what I love about these movies set in middle school, with middle school kids, is they still retain some of that innocence, that they're not like, it's not the thing that pushes them to rebel, Right. And there's something enjoyable about watching that. They're not pissed off, Yeah. Their lives aren't perfect by any stretch. Ethan Hawke is getting beat up at school. He kind of just has to go along with it, He does his part to just kind of roll with it and fight back to the extent that he can. He doesn't have a moment where he turns into the hero and beats the crap out of his bully. I liked all of that. I liked these kids.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing. I mean, this is a great trio of kids. It makes sense that they're all together. And there's also a good amount of time spent on building them up.
Yeah.
Because like they don't know Darren to begin with.
Nope.
And, you know, like all that stuff works. I mean, and you can kind of look at it as the movie's moving pretty slowly.
For sure.
I guess. But you know, it's the same thing. If you watch E.T., it's very much the same thing. Like that movie moves really slow. It's just everything you're watching is interesting. So, you know, now it would be, you'd have 10 to 15 minutes and then you'd have to be into the action of the movie.
Yeah. They'd be in the spaceship and on their way.
Yeah. Like we got to get them to space.
That's something we'll get into with D.A.R.Y.L as well. They push that even further, I think, to the point where maybe they cross a little bit too far. But I'm with you. And one of the things I really liked about this movie and in those moments is, I mean, the idea of making a spaceship, I think, is like a totally 80s thing in some ways. You know, maybe it was also, you know, a couple decades before that too, with kids that were, you know, in the very early days of the space race. But here it's like, yeah, if I just have a computer and some crap from the scrapyard, I could make a spaceship, you know.
Yeah.
And you get that montage. I mean, it's kind of great. Like, I mean, I sort of love that, and I felt watching it again this time. It's like, you know what? I probably spent about 20 minutes in my garage one day after watching this movie, just looking for pieces to scrap together and think of.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm gonna make a spaceship, and it's like, you know, I probably didn't get very far with it, obviously, but I love that. I mean,
or you wouldn't be here anymore.
Yeah, exactly. And to your point, where, you know, the biggest thing that you maybe noticed about Goonies was there's no computer, there's no internet. You know, here I think that scene in specific, that sequence. Boy, that's a great one as far as like, I don't, you know, today it's, what would that look like? You know, would you have kids kind of doing the exact same thing, or would you have to have the sequence where they've got their phone right beside it and they're watching a YouTube video on how to put together, you know, how to weld a garbage can to something else, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm so glad we don't have any of that here. Thank God.
Yeah. Well, but, and it's, for whatever reason, it's totally viable. Like you've got Darren, who, sure, he rides a motorcycle. He must know how to put things together.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and you know, once you have that force field, the only thing that bothered me about the force field thing, I wonder if this bothers anyone else out there. And it's not like it took me out of the movie that much or anything, but it's like the first time they really go out for a flight, they get into the thing and they turn on the force field. The force field comes on and it cuts the blocks that are holding the thing up. And they like fall away, and then they go flying.
Yeah.
But earlier, River Phoenix was caught in the bubble, but his feet weren't chopped off. And so that's just one of those things where I couldn't get out of my head. I'm like, well, how did he end up in that bubble?
Yeah.
Without getting anything chopped off. Again, not super important, but
No, and I mean, to the extent that I really like when it goes haywire in the basement and then it goes down the street and then it comes back in and it's just like, man, I mean, it could kill you easily if it hits you. I mean, you get that impression.
Well, and that's the other thing that's kind of great about it is like that thing flying around, you do have to hide from it because it'll go through a wall.
Yeah.
And it does. Like, yeah, it's kind of awesome.
It's sort of that be careful of what you wish for, and, you know, there's responsibility to this thing that they've created, you know, which I kind of like. But I will say the science of like any of this, I didn't understand. And they have moments where they touch on it. You know, River Phoenix will spew out something. But I kind of like that they just didn't make a big deal out of it. I think that's always the secret. Like, less is more. And again, we're going to see D.A.R.Y.L's slightly different ball of wax. But did any of that bother you at all?
Which for how the force field worked and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, just the science of like, getting off the ground and like the oxygen. You know, I think they get oxygen tanks, but in any of that stuff. I mean, like, because I was thinking, it's like, they're going to leave the atmosphere in this thing, you know, I mean, all that,
right.
You know, it's like when you think about that, the realities of even flying to any sort of altitude, a lot of this is going to fall apart. But
well, that's the thing. I mean, it didn't bother me at all.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's just because I'm nostalgic for that time of movies. I mean, it can't just be that. I mean, it's definitely ridiculous that you're just going to type a few things on a computer and then you're going to have a force field. Doesn't make sense. Like certainly the science in Back to the Future like works a little harder at trying to make it feel like there's a thing behind how it works.
Right.
Whereas this is like he had these dreams. I mean, it works enough. He had these dreams that were basically implanted in his head.
Mm-hmm.
The dreams don't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense that he drew a thing and then none of that makes sense, but it makes enough sense. For me anyway. So yeah, so when that came on, because I mean, really, as a kid especially, you just want to get to the part where they have the force field.
Yeah.
So, get me there without completely insulting my intelligence, and then have fun with it.
Yeah, yeah. I think this movie is notable beyond the science of it, but just within that world. Some of the effects, I think there's some Tron vibe to the animation of the dream sequences, where you're seeing what is, I don't know, is it supposed to be like a motherboard or something? I don't know. Like it's clearly got some geometric pattern to it that they then, he wakes up and draws it down and then takes it to River Phoenix and he's like, oh, this is a circuit board, blah 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 blah. I can grade it. But this is ILM. I don't know if that qualifies as CG. I mean, it seems like it looks like it's not
I think
hand-drawn animation, right?
No, it's definitely not hand-drawn. Like that's definitely computer.
Yeah, and you've also got Rob Bottin did a lot of the makeup effects in this thing, and he did, he's a legend. He did the movie Legend and Total Recall and RoboCop and a ton of stuff. But I think it's also interesting here in this movie that some of that stuff doesn't hold up. Specifically... Yeah. You can kind of see how far I think green screen has come, because a lot of the flying sequences in the force field when they're on Earth are clearly done that way. And I mean, that first time that River Phoenix is in the bubble, when he's in the air, it doesn't look very good. But then he crashes into the ground, and like they're using practical effects to sort of explode dirt and things like that. And that stuff I thought looked cool.
Yeah. Even
having the little like gopher or whatever, like animatronic or puppet gopher stick its head out of the hole after he comes, I was like, oh, that's kind of cool,
Yeah, it was kind of like, the bubble looked pretty fake.
Yeah.
Like that green screen stuff looked pretty fake, but at the same time, the bubble, they also did like warp anything that was behind it. Mm-hmm. So, there was kind of a dimension to it. And I think, there was one other shot where I'm not exactly sure how they did it, and I don't know if it was just my copy was low quality enough that I just couldn't see the obvious things that was happening. But there's a bit where they're just hovering, and a helicopter comes to check them out.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I don't know if your copy, it looked more fakey to you, but like the helicopter goes all the way around it, so it's shining a light on it, and the light gets behind it, and it's just shining at you from the... I don't know. It looked very seamless to me.
I was impressed by that. It was
hovering,
That scene in particular, and I think maybe some of the benefit of that is the lighting versus, the first time River Phoenix goes into the bubble, it's in broad daylight, and maybe there's some difference there just because of the brightness of it. But I don't know. It would be interesting to kind of get all the kind of juicy effects stuff there.
Juicy.
It's maybe worth mentioning the pilots of the helicopter are Dick Miller, who was in Gremlins, and Meshack Taylor, of Designing Women fame and Mannequin.
Yeah.
You also got in supporting roles here James Cromwell, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
I think River Phoenix's family is supposed to be German, correct?
The Muellers, they have a deep accent, or he does anyway.
Yeah.
They both do.
Yeah. And I thought that was kind of fun. I mean, I don't know. It would be interesting to know, like, why did they decide that? Is it just because they were like, well, the name Wolfgang is cool, let's call him that? It's like, well, why would his parents name him Wolfgang? Well, what if they're German? It's like, what do you go through the process of coming up with that? Danny Nucci, we talked about briefly before we started recording, is he's listed as a nasty kid at school, and you might remember him from Titanic. He played Fabrizio, who was like the very... very Italian immigrant running around with old Leo there. Robert Picardo, a lot of you I think are going to know. I think he's in one of the Star Trek reiterations. So, there's people here and there that obviously had major careers and showed up all over the place. And Absolutely. I think you and I both bemoan the fact that Jason Presson didn't do a ton after this of note. Some TV stuff, some video stuff. He was in Lady in White, and Gremlins 2. And I really liked his performance in this movie. I thought all the kids were good, but obviously there's more of a knowledge towards Hawk and Phoenix, and maybe rightfully so. But I thought this kid held his own, for sure.
He definitely did. I mean, he definitely didn't fade into the background. Like, he was an important part of the team.
This movie is also notable in that apparently it's got Easter eggs coming out the wazoo, and by Easter eggs, there's just little things like I guess there's a Rosebud sled in there, obviously not to Citizen Kane. There's a line from Poltergeist, the Springsteen song. There's a bunch of other stuff. There's, I think, a mention of the town, the fictional town in Gremlins makes an appearance somewhere here and there.
Well, the one I saw was the middle school was named after Chuck Jones.
Oh, okay.
I think, anyway. Charles M. Jones Middle School. And that feels kind of like a trope of the 80s in a way, although it might have just been people like Dante and Landis who would just kind of put these joke things in the background because they just were such big fans of that stuff. Oh, and you know what? Jason Presson, no one will care about this except for me, but he was in an episode of The Twilight Zone, the new Twilight Zone from the 80s. And it's one of the very few that I totally remember called The Shadow Man. Do you have any recollection of this episode?
No.
Did you ever watch those?
Yeah, but I don't remember them that well.
The Shadow Man, let me just run it down for you. This will be a great tangent because we're only 12 minutes past the hour.
Sure.
So he's playing this kid named Eric, and one night the shadow comes out from under his bed, so he freaks out. He's like super scared, and the guy says, "Don't worry, I'm the Shadow Man from under your bed. Like, I'll never hurt you. I'll only protect you." And then Eric uses the Shadow Man to get revenge on some other kids and stuff. And then toward the end, he goes somewhere to meet up with the Shadow Man to get revenge on some more kids, as I remember. I could be totally wrong about the revenge part. But this part I know is true, because as a kid, this made my blood run cold. Mm-hmm. The Shadow Man shows up, and the kid is like, "Okay, well, here's who we're going to go get now." And the Shadow Man says, "No, I'm not going to do that." And Eric says, "You got to. You're the Shadow Man." And he says, "Yes, I'm the Shadow Man, but I'm the Shadow Man from under someone else's bed."
Ooh.
And then you just see like the shadow go across his face and it blacks out.
Wow.
And I was like, oh man, Eric bit the dust.
Poor Eric.
Shadow Man. Go watch it now that I've spoiled it for you.
Maybe should have mentioned also Bradley Gregg, who was one of the like bully gang guys in Explorers, played Eyeball in Stand By Me. And also Roscoe.
He's always been a good gang member.
Yeah. Roscoe in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, which I don't remember that character, but I haven't seen that movie forever.
He was at the very beginning.
Yeah.
I totally remember because he was one of the gang of the prototype Indiana Jones.
He's a gang dude.
Who like takes the thing away from River Phoenix.
Okay.
He's like one of those guys.
Maybe he's a buddy of Phoenix. I don't know. And Nightmare on Elm Street 3, he's in there. Oh, but speaking of Phoenix, I did forget to mention this. Like, apparently, he and Ethan Hawke both had a thing for Amanda Peterson. And, supposedly, according to Dante, I think Ethan Hawke kind of
won out,
pulled into the lead of...
hey, man, that's why he's the Hawk, y'all.
Perfection. Sadly, Amanda Peterson is not with us anymore.
Oh, that's true. Yeah,
died of an OD, apparently. Sucks.
Amanda.
And good night, folks.
Yep. No. let's leave it on that.
We won't leave it on that, because then we wouldn't be able to talk about D.A.R.Y.L.
He's a mystery and a miracle.
He's just a little boy, flesh and blood, isn't he?
With a past he doesn't remember.
D.A.R.Y.L is an experiment in artificial intelligence.
Are you really my mom and dad?
And powers he doesn't understand.
You're now saying it can feel human emotion.
Yes, he experiences pleasure and pain.
The government designed him.
You're asking us to destroy a child.
Now they want him destroyed.
The Youth Life Form project as of now is terminated.
Paramount Pictures presents D.A.R.Y.L.
I know, Craig, you didn't get to yet. You think maybe you have seen back in the day, perhaps?
I saw this in the theater, no question about it.
Saw in the theater, wow.
Yeah.
I wish I could talk to theater Craig right now, because
I know, right?
Yeah, this is definitely one of those movies, and I even felt it watching it again, where I think they sold us something other than they delivered. Even looking at this poster right now of the DVD cover, you've got Barrett Oliver, I'm going to do that a bunch probably.
Yeah.
Who, if you haven't seen D.A.R.Y.L, he was the kid reading the book in Neverending Story. He was Bastian. And also, he has a big year this year. He shows up in Cocoon as well, and then Cocoon the sequel. Anyway, you got that kid, right? And he's in the cockpit of an airplane, flying the plane. And I watched the trailer, and that figures prominently in that as well, as does the opening. There's an opening chase sequence where he's running from a helicopter. And that's not this movie. That is the last 2 minutes, not two, a little more than 2 maybe, minutes of the movie when he is in the airplane. And the helicopter chase is the first 2 or 3 minutes of the movie. And what you get in between, in some ways, is way less satisfying but more interesting. I think of the 3 movies that we watched, this is definitely the one with perhaps the actual most science fiction bent to it, because it is posing the question about artificial intelligence and how you treat artificial intelligence, specifically when they look like a kid. And that's a pretty interesting question. Clearly, you can draw a straight connection, and I'm sure none exist whatsoever. But the movie AI, we can't do these things without talking about Spielberg. But that movie is kind of the same thing as this, except the parents know that the kid is a robot from the get-go. Right. And here you've got a kid who escapes from this helicopter chase in the opening and shows up in the woods and is found, and he has no memory. He's got amnesia. Classic setup for a Bourne Identity movie. Which they need to do a Bourne Identity kids movie. I mean, like, that would be amazing, right? If it's a kid who turns out he's an assassin. Anyway, kind of what he is, folks. He's a robot that was created for a military program. Before you find all that out, he's a kid. He ends up in sort of like a little halfway house kind of situation, orphanage boys home thing, where they do like a little bit of vetting, and there's a sequence where he glances at an eye chart and turns around and recites it verbatim without even looking at it. There's a little bit of being interviewed by the staff there, and it's like, okay, this kid is different. He's got no memory, but he's unique. He's special. He seems very normal, calm, nice, innocent kid on the surface, but there's something going on beneath. He's placed with a couple. Interestingly here, played by Michael McKean in a very extremely straight role. I mean, this is like, this is very much a sort of prototypical family movie set of parents. They're loving, they're nice, they're caring. They've got, a couple little quirks. His wife is played by Mary Beth Hurt. She's a piano teacher, teaches out of her house. I don't know what Michael McKean does, but he coaches baseball teams, big baseball guy. And so they basically are adopting this kid for a short amount of time, hoping that they could maybe adopt him permanently. And then, of course, after they form a bond with him, which takes all of the first at least like 40 minutes of this movie, right? So you're watching this, and like, this is a straight family drama with a few little moments where, like, the neighbor kid, who of course is named Turtle, because you can't have a kids movie in the 80s without like some fun nickname for a kid, right?
Yep.
He doesn't wear sleeves on his shirt. His name's Danny Corkle. He talks about his sister being an amateur hooker. He's sort of the comic relief of this thing in that regard. And he has D.A.R.Y.L over, and D.A.R.Y.L like aces pole position on Atari the first time he's playing it, right? Which basically they just speed up the game, through video and make it look like he's just driving super fast. Anyway, so that something's different about this kid. 2 people show up. They claim to be his parents. They've got photos of him from when he was younger, and they take him back. You find out very quickly these are basically scientists, and they created D.A.R.Y.L. And essentially he has a computer for a brain. It just immediately, like, when you hear that as an adult, right, in 2017, and this is maybe where especially as a kid, obviously, but even maybe as an adult in 85, you don't start asking like, well, wait a second, he's been eating food, you know, because like if you know he's a robot, but you don't know that he's just got like a computer. Even if you have a computer brain, I don't know, how does that work with all your other human organs, right?
Right.
So I was like, well, where's his food going? Is he pooping? What's going on here?
Well, and let me ask this, as long as we're on that tip,
Yeah.
and forgive me if this was obvious, but why did they decide to build a super soldier out of a 10-year-old boy?
That is not obvious to me. I don't know. Maybe I missed that in the explanation. There's definitely a military commander who's our bad guy in this whole thing, and he has some of those moments where he's talking about a General Greycliff. I don't remember that. I don't remember if the plan was, it's like, okay, well, he's going to grow into an adult and then he'll be able to kill people. Like, what would be the possible advantage of having a kid be the... It makes no sense.
Why would you want to build it and then like have to wait 18 years or something?
Yeah, I don't know.
But it wasn't, obviously it wasn't obvious.
It was not obvious.
In the story, like that you have to be small or you have to like get people to trust you. Or
you may recall back in the day, the best way to spy on somebody was to climb through the air shaft and the ventilation ducts.
I've done that countless times.
And it works better when you're a child of Daryl's size, right?
Sure.
So maybe that's it. I don't know.
But it also worked for Bruce Willis, though.
Yeah, that's true. It's worked for a lot of adults.
Like it's worked for a lot of people.
But yeah, it's hard to watch this movie as an adult and have that kind of information dropped on you and not have 1,000 questions pop up, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But I will say, of the 3 movies, this one is at least asking the most adult question here. And in fact, they state it blatantly when one of the scientists, Dr. Ellen Lamb, played by Catherine Walker, says, a machine becomes human when you can't tell the difference anymore. And that's sort of based on the Turing test. I think it was obviously something you saw in Blade Runner. Mm-hmm. It's asking that question again, shows up in AI years later. Mm-hmm. And that's an interesting question, especially now in the world that we live in, when we are talking to digital assistants. It's kind of interesting to me, and I wonder if this plays into the fact that the movie did not do very well. I think it finished 99th in the box office that year.
That would be accurate.
Because, you're trying to wedge interesting questions on a sci-fi scale into what's otherwise a straight sort of like family drama. Like drama.
Yeah.
And so that to me was like the big thing with this movie, and like watching it, I'm like, I don't know if this works. And I don't know if it works because Explorers and Goonies, you've got, like those ordinary kids that we talked about that we loved, doing extraordinary things, and they're in peril and they have adventure. Here, this kid is not ordinary, right? And that's the thing. Like, that's what makes him interesting. But he's in an extremely ordinary circumstance for the bulk of this movie. He's playing baseball. He's going to school, getting picked on a little bit, dealing with that, dealing with parents and feeling love and trying to please them and wondering, did I go too far, or do I need to mess up so that mom is not doubting her role in this relationship and things like that. That's why I'm so curious, like, what would you have thought walking out of the theater as a kid seeing that? That was good. I like the fact that he was a robot and flew a plane. And, I can imagine your dad being like, yeah, well, that was like 3 minutes of the movie. The rest of it was boring as hell.
I don't want to take you to another one of these.
Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, like, it's tough because, we talked about, I think that quote from Ebert in the previous episode, we were talking about, having kids play a little bit older than they are to sort of find that sweet spot of having a movie that still appeals to kids and still, is satisfying to adults. Here, I don't know. It's harder to pinpoint who exactly the audience is,
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the tricky thing. And again, I don't remember exactly how I felt when I saw it, but it's not one that I've watched over and over again. So it wasn't one that really stuck with me. And I feel like I wouldn't be surprised if a part of that is, you get into this movie and then you realize, oh, that kid's not like me at all.
Yeah.
Like, that kid's a robot. That doesn't, that's not super fun. Like, it'd be interesting if it was a kid. Did it have even the Blade Runner-y feeling of like he doesn't know he's a robot?
No.
See, that would be super interesting to me.
Yeah, because he finds out pretty much immediately after he's like picked up by this other family. I mean, by the two scientists who come and get him.
Yeah,
you know, they're sort of telling, and like what happened was, and I had to like read this to kind of like extrapolate all the info. But in the opening chase, he's being let go by another scientist or someone in the military who gained a conscience, I guess, and you know, helped him escape. But they wiped his memory, his computer memory, in his brain and let him go. Which I'm assuming means they're kind of wiping a lot of the military, you know, designs or desires for that robot kid.
Right.
Again, don't know why he's a kid. I don't know why they want a kid. So yeah, he knows none of that, but he does find out really quickly, you know. And that's, I don't know. Yeah, you're right. That is part of the disappointment. And part of what made AI interesting was, you know, a robot knowing he's a robot, but wanting desperately to be a real kid.
Yeah.
And that question is really super heavy on the sci-fi side, and I think would be tough for them to kind of, I mean, obviously they're going for the same market that Explorers is with this movie, or E.T. or some of that Spielberg world landscape, that they kind of missed the target here.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, you know, even to me, like just looking at this poster that I'm looking at, the one where he's there's like three scientists in a window watching him while he's watching the Jetsons on a screen in the middle of all these computers. It looks like a military facility, you know, and the way the name is all typed out there, like it feels like, no, this is gonna be like War Games and the Terminator.
Yeah, War Games for sure,
like
is what they're
going to be
hoping for.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I haven't seen that one in a long time, but I definitely remember that being more exciting. Again, I think it's a pretty ordinary kid in an extraordinary situation. Some interesting takeaways though from this, like watching it, and again just kind of asking like, okay, what makes this 1985 you know, beyond you know, pole position. You got walkie talkies again. Like I never had a damn walkie talkie as a kid. At least, like, you know, if I did, I don't know that I would have just given one to my neighbor, you know, my friend. But anyway, I felt like watching this, if this were made in 2017, and specifically because nobody knows this kid is a robot up front, but they know he's different, they would absolutely ask the questions like, is he on the spectrum? Like you would have to ask that, because a lot of what he does is sort of like Asperger's-esque in the numbers and memory and sort of like attention to detail and kind of lack of like outpouring of emotion kind of thing like that. You've also, again, I think I mentioned like the character of Turtle, like talking about his sister being an amateur hooker. There's one point where she is brought home, or she comes home from a date and just like, you know, innocently kiss on the cheek with her boyfriend, you know, boyfriend, date, whatever. Turtle's watching from the window on the walkie-talkie with D.A.R.Y.L, just doing commentary. And at one point he's like, she's practically being raped, except she's saying, you know, she's not saying no. And obviously that line would never fly today.
No.
Shit and damn both make appearances, pissed off, etc. D.A.R.Y.L says kiss my ass at one point. So all that stuff, you know, you kind of wonder, even in like as sterile as some of this movie feels like, and I think this is certainly more, in a lot of ways, PG than the other two movies. Even though some of that dialogue is probably worse than in Explorers, but just the overall feel of it is way more PG here. This movie apparently, it looks like it's maybe set in Charleston, South Carolina, because there is a map that shows up when he's flying, he's making his big escape at the end when he gets in the cockpit of this jet and takes off and flees the military after being captured again. Looks like they're heading towards Charleston, but it was, oddly enough, filmed partly at Pinewood Studios in London, which I'm guessing just all the interior stuff and the sets. But then Dillsboro, North Carolina, and Brevard, North Carolina, which are kind of close to me. And then Orlando, Florida. So, I mean, I'm curious to... they really went all over the place for this little movie that finished 99th at the box office about a robot boy. So I think in some ways that's probably telling of what they kind of hoped it might be and didn't quite get there. Director Simon Windsor is an Aussie. Did Lightning Jack, Operation Dumbo Drop. He's Crocodile D in Los Angeles, which that movie came out in 2001, Craig. Can you believe that? I did not know that.
No.
He's also got Harley Davidson and The Marlboro Man, Free Willy, and Quigley Down under his belt. You know, some big titles there for that director.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken here, yes, David Ambrose, the writer. No, I'm sorry, Alan Scott, one of the other credited writers, wrote Don't Look Now. You know that movie?
Oh, wow.
The Donald
No,
Sutherland,
absolutely.
Julie Christie, like Sex Fest. Yeah, I mean, like, I can't imagine, like, that guy was a writer on D.A.R.Y.L, especially because that movie came out before D.A.R.Y.L. So, there, somebody had to be like, you know who we need for D.A.R.Y.L? Let's get the guy that did Don't Look Now. Let's get him in here and clean this up.
That's the tone we're going for.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'd be curious to know which parts he contributed. I don't know. I think, it's an interesting piece for the period. I think it's a good example of what's not successful in this genre, sad to say, especially watching it, in comparison to the other two movies that we talked about.
Yeah.
I like some of the performances. I actually kind of liked Michael McKean as a straight guy. Joseph Summer played one of the doctors, and I liked him a lot too, actually. And he's going to show up again when we talk about Witness, Craig. He's in that movie.
Oh.
Yeah. So connections all over the place. One bit of a little trivia here. Barrett Oliver. Now, obviously, we talked about this kid like he's a big 80s kid, Never Ending Story, Cocoon. That's big deal here. He was also in Frankenweenie, which was the short film.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the short film that Burton did, obviously well before he turned that into a feature. But if you haven't seen a picture of Barrett Oliver now, it's worth Googling. I think you'll be surprised at what he looks like. But listen to this.
Yeah.
After kind of giving up acting, moving on in his life, he apparently has become quite the photographer and printer, specializing in, quote, 19th century processes such as collodion and Woodbury type. His work has been displayed in museum and gallery exhibitions and used in films. He even has a book called A History of the Woodbury Type that is out there, published in 2007.
Well, good for him.
Craig,
Yeah.
also in an episode of The Twilight Zone titled Grandma.
I don't remember that one. Unless that's the one where Grandma calls him from beyond the grave.
Could be.
Could be.
He did have a walkie-talkie.
Ah.
Can you make a call on the walkie-talkies from the grave?
It depends on the reach of the
The frequency.
Signal.
Showed up in Incredible Hulk episode, Knight Rider, and Highway to Heaven. So some solid 80s heavyweights on both TV and film side. Seems like he's doing an interesting thing now with his life, and that's always nice to know. D.A.R.Y.L, I would say if you're going down memory lane, you can probably take a turn and maybe skip this one.
That's probably true. Unless you're just being a completist, which I guess I'm going to be, because I'm definitely going to watch it.
So I think that's that. There's definitely other movies that have kids in prominent roles that, have adventure elements like Return to Oz, Young Sherlock Holmes. I think we're going to get to some of those in a different episode. But I think these three, looking through that list of like 180 movies, these three just felt more of like siblings. So if you're out there wondering why we didn't include them in this episode, that's why. Deal with it. And obviously, if you know of another movie we missed that would fit closely with these three, I'd love to hear about it. Smart guys.
Absolutely.
Smart gals.
And speaking of hearing about it, I need to bring up our correction corner.
Oh, yeah.
So whatever music we have for that, we need to play that right now.
Correction corner.
That's good. That should do it. I just want to throw this out there because I think we had a bit of a misunderstanding on the last podcast where we were talking about Rocky IV. I think you were saying Brigitte Nielsen was in it, and was she the wife of Dolph Lundgren in the movie?
Yeah.
But I took it as real life, and I said, yeah, she was married to Sylvester Stallone. In the movie, of course, Talia Shire is his wife.
Right.
And Brigitte Nielsen did play the wife of Ivan Drago in the movie. I just want to throw that out there.
Well, it's just
so that people don't immediately listen to that and think these guys have no idea what's happening in 1985.
Well, you like that I didn't correct you because that clearly shows how recently I've watched a Rocky movie.
Yeah.
Talia Shire, forgot about her.
Anyway,
well,
just want to throw that out there.
I think we're definitely going to get to that movie. You know, I think it fits with a lot of the other kind of. There's a lot of like martial arts and fighting movies, and maybe we'll lump it in with that one, or we'll go down the Stallone big action star Schwarzenegger road. So look forward to that. We definitely are. We're figuring out our pairings and episodes. I mean, I'm here to tell you we could probably do like 7 more that are just about different youth movies, you know. We're just getting started, and yeah, it's going to be awesome.
It's going to suck. Counterpoint.
It's not going to suck. It's going to be cool. Come join us.
Fair enough.
Until then, visit us online, say hello, follow everything that you need to follow with us, and we'll be posting a bunch of other things real soon.
Sounds real good.
All right, let's go build a spaceship.
Okay.